Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today I'm going to do a video answering a very common question I get asked. After I give people a full tour of the ship, or they come on board recognizing me from the YouTube channel or something, they say, Ryan, you know so much, did you ever serve? No, I did not serve. End of video, see you next week. So we're going to talk a little bit about my background and that sort of stuff here in a minute, but first, today's video is sponsored by MyHeritage. MyHeritage is a leading global service for family history, research, and DNA testing, trusted by 90 million users. MyHeritage not only makes building your family tree a simple and enjoyable activity, it also gives you access to powerful tools that can help you research your family history and grow your tree. MyHeritage is home to more than 18 billion easily searchable historical records, as well as advanced AI technology for repairing, enhancing, colorizing, and animating historical photographs. So, it's been really cool using the MyHeritage website, and it's almost like crowdsourcing your family tree. When I logged on there and plugged in who my grandparents were, it popped up with this page of, is this your grandmother, and her full name and birth dates and whatnot. I was like, oh yeah, that is her. And it's like, oh well, somebody's been researching her side of the family, and here's already half of that family tree built. So that was really cool finding. And then as I add pictures and names of my family members, it's also filling in the family trees of distant relations I've never even met before, who are also on here doing the same sort of genealogical research. So that was really cool to find out. I'm also excited in testing their AI for repairing photographs. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any of the family photos from my mom. I live out of state from the rest of my family, so I haven't been able to get those pictures yet, but possibly in a future video I'll be able to show you that sort of stuff. Today's video is all about my family and their service, but if you'd like to find out more about your family and their possible service, sign up now for a 14-day free trial and enjoy all the amazing features of MyHeritage that they have to offer. If you decide to continue your subscription, there's a link below that'll give you a 50% discount. So, like I said at the beginning of the video, I have not served in the military. I've always been interested in World War II naval history and battleships, and growing up, I always thought that that meant going to the Naval Academy or enlisting in the Navy, something like that. And when I actually grew up to an age when I could do that, I realized that there were no battleships in the Navy. I had been 2 years old when the last battleship was decommissioned. And growing up, I always assumed that they would bring them back into service until I was college age, and I was like, well, shoot, now it's been 16 years since they were last in service. If they haven't brought them back by now, it's unlikely it's going to happen. And during that time, I lived through the 9/11 attacks, subsequent war on terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan, so there were opportunities to bring these ships back, and I realized that wasn't the case. And I'm not called to military service, but there is still a way for me to work on battleships. And so that's how I ended up where I am here. Why are ships like this important to me, though? Just because I haven't served doesn't mean that my family didn't. My uncle served in the Air Force and retired after 20 some odd years of service, and his wife he met in the Air Force, she also retired. But honestly, in my parents' generation, I've got more family who were in law enforcement than in the military. Not so during my grandparents' generation. Practically every one of my male relatives of that generation served. On my father's side, they predominantly served in the Navy during World War II and in the immediate post-war years. One of my great uncles served on both of the Essex-class aircraft carriers Wasp and Franklin. He was a carpenter's mate, and it seems like he served on Franklin after she took the damage. So I think he was sent to the New York Navy Yard to work on repairs to Franklin after she came back in after that massive kamikaze hit. Franklin probably suffered a higher proportion of casualties than any other ship that's ever survived and sailed herself home. Over 900 out of a little bit less than 3,000 of her crew, about 1/3 of the total crew, was killed in a kamikaze strike right near the end of World War II. The kamikaze hit the ship, crashed right through the wooden flight deck, and was able to systematically detonate a series of loaded and fueled aircraft in the hangar and on the flight deck that caused a series of explosions. I would be hard-pressed to think of another ship that made it back to port after sustaining the amount of casualties and the amount of damage that that ship took. So she manages to get her way all the way back to New York, and of course with 1/3 of her crew out of action, they had to bring in more sailors, and that seems to be the timeline when my great uncle served on her. So as carpenter's mate, those guys were the damage controlman of the day. The rating of damage controlman didn't exist. That was carpenter's mates during World War II. So of course aircraft carriers have the wooden flight deck. So I suspect he did a lot of work on that. Also, he served on WASP during the war, like I said. In fact, my dad made him a model of WASP, the old Naval model kit that I built one in the same series when I was younger. Another one of my great uncles served on USS San Marcos, which is not, his war service isn't particularly remarkable, but he was on San Marcos during the Bikini Atoll atomic bomb tests, and that was something I only recently found out. Unfortunately, I didn't know any of this growing up with them. The whole Szymanski clan would get together at my grandfather's house every 4th of July and a couple other major holidays, and little Ryan didn't ask the right questions while they were still with us. My dad's father, who I called Judja, D-Z-I-A, D-Z-I-A, which is the Polish word for pop-pop, Judja was the youngest in the family, and he grew up on these stories of my great uncles in World War II, and he wanted to do that too, so he enlisted in the Navy as well. Of course, it was the post-war years, and he had a completely different experience. He didn't actually enjoy his Navy experience. He had taken a class on typing in high school, so they made him a yeoman instead of getting to learn a trade like his brothers did. And so he only did a couple of years and then he got out. He served on a ship called USS Neptune. And Neptune laid some of the early SOSUS cables in the Atlantic. So this was a system that the United States installed that was basically a series of hydrophones to listen for Russian submarines, because we knew that getting into the Atlantic they had to come through the Greenland, UK, Iceland gap. So we were able to lay a series of sonar and hydrophone and stuff across that gap to listen for them. To do this, the Navy took over a civilian ship, made her USS Neptune, and this ship is designed to lay cable on the seabed. They set her up to lay the cable off of the bow of the ship. They didn't want to lay it off of the stern where it could get fouled in the propellers. What this meant was Neptune had to sail across the Atlantic backwards. So that probably also played into Judge's disinterest in his naval service. So he spends a couple of years on Neptune, sailing backwards across the Atlantic, laying cable, and then gets out as soon as he can, and goes to work in the Bethlehem Steel Mill in Sparrows Point in Baltimore, just like his siblings did for his entire career. Bethlehem Steel in Baltimore, of course, makes more Liberty ships than anywhere else in the world during World War II. Of course, my family works there afterwards. My final family member that I want to talk about in this video is my mom's dad, Pop-Pop. Pop-Pop served in the Army in the Philippines during World War II. He already had 2 kids and was already married, so he was not drafted until extremely, extremely late in the war. Typically, guys like him, he also worked at the Bethlehem Steel Mill in Baltimore. Guys like him who worked in an important war industry, who had kids and were married, were typically not drafted until there were no other options left. But by the time you're drafting your 14 millionth man, you're sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel. And so his story really shows how far down the United States was drawing its manpower reserves. Pop-Pop went to officer candidate school and was on a 3-ship convoy on his way, went from Florida to Panama, was on his way to Okinawa to take over a squad of men that was going to be part of the invasion of Japan. And fortunately, that invasion never happened because Pop-Pop, literally fresh out of training and fresh off the boat, his odds were not that great. Glad that the war ended before he actually got to the front. He was in this convoy somewhere in the mid-Pacific when they got the word that Japan had surrendered and the war was over. Now the problem was that this meant that people could start to go home. And the U.S. decided to do it based on merit. The number of points you had from time in service and from combat experience meant you got to go home first. Well, Pop-Pop has no points. He hasn't gotten to the war zone yet. So he goes to the Philippines instead of to be part of the occupation of Japan. Since he's an officer with no other experience, they put him in charge of a group that is more or less doing insurance claims. If Philippine natives came in and said, hey, their farm was destroyed during the war, their livestock were killed by the American bombing or something like that, he would go out and say, oh yeah, there's a dead cow here. This cow was killed by a 30 caliber bullet. So the U.S. government should pay this local for the damages done to them during the war. Things like that. So he ended up spending the next 2 years in the Philippines while my grandmother was raising their 2 children, my aunt and uncle, alone, waiting for him to come back to get enough points that he could be discharged. I knew very little about Pop-Pop's service because he never talked about it. All I knew was that he would never eat rice again after spending 2 years in the Philippines. So I'm extremely grateful to my heritage for having access to all of these documents and family trees and other things like this to help me learn about my family's history. And like, I knew they served in the military, but I didn't know what they did. And that's the really cool thing about my heritage, is going through these original documents and being able to find this information out. And it not only benefits me, but it benefits all of my family members, some of whom I don't even know. So again, there's a link in the description below if you'd like to check out your own family history. There's a 14-day free trial, and then you can also get 50% off if you continue to research beyond that. And doing that helps support the museum. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State and also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves and like My Heritage. We really appreciate their support. Another way you can support us is by liking, sharing, and subscribing. That way more people find out about our channel and the museum. Thanks for watching.